I have chosen Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven. The Raven is about a man whose love is called Lenore and she's dead. In the poem, the lyrical eye hears a knocking at his chamber door, but when he opens, there's nothing there to see, but the only thing he hears is the whisper of Lenore. Um, and Then he opens the window after hearing something, and in flies a raven. The raven can speak, but it can only say one word, nevermore. And the lyrical eye talks to the raven about Lenore, but the raven keeps on saying the same word, nevermore. The poem is a lyrical poem because it has a lyrical eye. And the lyrical eye narrates about his or her feelings, and thoughts, which is characteristic for lyrical poems. The tone is set through the lyrical eye's interior that seems very, very sorrowful, lonely, and in some ways depressed. In stanza 2, in verse 1, distinctly I remember it was the bleak December. And December is characterized as a cold and dark month, which tells the reader something about the setting, but also something about the mood of the poem. The outer composition in the poem consists of 18 stanzas with 6 verses in each. It's very harmonic, which is in contrast to the internal conflicts and feelings that the lyrical eye is dealing with throughout the poem. And the internal composition actually seems to be built up on an action, but it is still a lyrical poem. But it's sort of told through a flashback, because since the first verse refers to something that happened some time ago, as it starts with once upon a midnight dreary. And the whole poem is written in past tense until the last stanza, that is written in present tense. So, for example, in stanza 17, I shrieked, whereas stanza 18 is, and the raven never flitting, still is sitting. So that is sort of like it's told from a flashback. And the poem has poetic devices such as rhyming. The verses 4, 5, and 6 in each stanza rhymes. So some, door, more, Lenore, Lenore, evermore, and so on. And also the last word in every first verse in each stanza rhymes with another word in the same verse. So in the first stanza, once upon a midnight dreary, while I wandered weak and weary. So dreary and weary are examples of assonance, as they sound the same. And weak and weary is an example of a alliteration. Yeah. And there's also in the poem there are some examples of lyrical features as well, such as similes and metaphors. And in stanza 14, there is a metaphor. Then mid-thought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer. And this could be both, it could be either metaphor or personification, because the air is given a human feature to grow. So yeah, the one does not exclude the other, but yeah. And there's another example of a metaphor in stanza 10. Other friends have flown before, and this is a metaphor for how the lyrical eye has experienced the loss of friends before, but friends and therefore humans cannot fly. So there's also examples of similes in the poem, and this is, for example, in the same stanza, that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. And this is a simile that is an example of a simile because that one word, nevermore, is compared with how the Raymond outpours his whole soul for that one word. And the expression as if is also characteristic when using similes. And also in verse 5 in the same stanza, there's another example of similes. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. And how he will leave him is compared to how the lyrical eye's hopes have disappeared before and earlier. So, and as is also a word characteristic when using similes. Alliteration is something that is there are many examples of alliteration in the text, and they're highlighted with green as here. Follow fast and follow faster, and what this grim, ungainly, ghastly gunt. The alliteration draws the reader into the setting, but also the mood of the poem, because it gives the poem an effect of singing maybe along with the troic octameter, where the use of repetition also is used, such as Lenore and Evermore, and this contributes to a very hypnotic effect, as if the reader is lulling the reader. For example, in the verse, while I nodded, nearly napping, gives this hypnotic effect. The alliteration also establishes the mood in the beginning of the poem in these five verses. The setting is described here as dark and cold. The dark scenery is also built up as through like the scary knocking on the lyrical eye's chamber door. So, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. 'Tis some visitor, I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this and nothing more. It builds like a suspense that something is about to happen. Yeah. And there's also examples of onomatopoeia in the poem that contribute to this lulling the reader to be there with the narrator in that room, in the same room as him. And this a good example of onomatopoeia would be from the third stanza, in verse 1, and the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. So it gives this feeling that we're there with the lyrical eye. There's also used allusions in these allusions, they refer especially to Greek mythology, and the two most characteristic allusions from the poem are Pallas and Plutonian. And in stanza 7, here's the first allusion: perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And Pallas is a symbol for Athena, who is the Greek goddess of wisdom, which could indicate that the raven holds some sort of knowledge about the future relationship and the afterworld, maybe, or the non-existing relationship that between the lyrical eye and Lenore. Lenore is a central person or character in the poem, who the lyrical eye refers a lot to throughout the text. And Lenore is a lost love of the lyrical eye. Lenore rhymes with evermore and nevermore, as it seems like the lyrical eye is trying to figure out, perhaps with the raven as well, whether or not Lenore and he are going to be forever or never, until the raven tells him that and keeps on telling him that they're never going to be. At the end of the poem, the bird or the raven is still reminding him that the lyrical I is condemned to spend the rest of his life in grieving. Because when the poem ends, he's still there watching him and reminding him of what he lost, in the quotation down here. The other allusion is Platonian, which is shown here also. And in this quotation, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Platonian shore. The lyrical I refers, actually writes himself, how the raven represents evil and death, because he points out himself that the night's Platonian shore is an illusion of the afterlife, as Pluto was the Roman god of the underworld. And in the quotation, the lyrical I wants the raven to fly back to the underworld with the dead. But in stanza 10, actually, before this happens, the lyrical I expresses some sort of loneliness in the verse, till I scarcely moved, the muttered other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said nevermore. But this also changes afterwards, because then he says in stanza 17 after this, after verse 2, leave my loneliness unbroken. So he actually wants the bird to fly away. And then quit the bust above my door. So, and in this, in the last stanza of the poem, in verse 5, and my soul from out the shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. This indicates how the lyrical I gives in to the raven about Lenore and accepts a permanent shadow or darkness of misery and grief in his life for the rest of his days. And his soul will actually never be lifted, and his spirits will never fully recover or be happy, because he will not get over the death of Lenore, because the raven will be reminding him forever. And also additionally to this, in the end of the poem, it becomes more religious as the lyrical I begins to refer to the raven as a prophet. So up in stanza 15, for example, prophet said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil. So he realizes the darkness over this raven. But the poem also refers to religious elements such as the balm in Gilead. And in the quotation, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore, quote the raven, nevermore. And also in by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we adore, are both religious elements in this poem. And these are also characteristic for the Gothic feature. These are also characterized as a Gothic feature. But the dark scenery and setting and scary suspense in the beginning are also literary features that can be characterized as Gothic elements. The themes in the poem, death, fear of loss, lost love, sorrow, unrequited love, and loneliness, are sad themes, depressing themes. That are also emphasized by the scary suspense in the beginning and the symbolism behind the raven that shows why the poem is a Gothic poem. And